Hi everyone, this is my presentation in conservation biology on extrinsic factors that affect the Florida manatee populations. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction and background on Florida manatees. They are marine mammals and they're herbivores. Their diet mainly consists of seagrass, but they do eat some invasive aquatic plant species as well. The Florida manatee is a subspecies of the West Indian manatee, and there's a myth going around that Florida manatees are invasive to Florida, and that's not true. They're native to Florida. Manatees have no known predators yet are currently listed as threatened in Florida. In 2017, they were downgraded from endangered to threatened, and they've maintained that threatened status to present day. We should care about this topic because we as humans are causing a lot of these manatee populations to decline, and manatees are very essential to the ecosystem, including helping to manage some of the invasive plant life in Florida. Okay, watercraft collisions. Manatees primarily live in shallow water, and due to this, they're prone to watercraft collisions. Arguably, the largest threat to manatees is watercraft collisions. So I'll address another question that I get and I see a lot is, why do manatees live in shallow water? Manatees live in shallow water because seagrass beds are mostly in shallow water. Seagrass needs sunlight because they do photosynthesis. So because the seagrass is primarily in shallow water, because it needs sunlight, that is where the manatees are. So that is why manatees live in shallow water, and shallow water would be defined as 3 to about 7 feet deep. And then another reason why watercraft collisions are such a large threat to manatees is poor boating behavior, and this includes not obeying speed limit signs, speeding through no wake zones. Both of those things and just poor boating behavior in general plays a role in watercraft collisions. And then continuing on the topic of watercraft collisions, last year alone in 2023, 555 manatees died in Florida. 89 of those deaths were confirmed to be watercraft related, while 46 were undetermined. The hypothesis, this is from the study Reichik et al. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But the hypothesis that manatees do not avoid boats because they don't see them as a threat can be rejected. And that's because in the Reichik study, they found that manatees do exhibit fluking behavior in response to watercraft, primarily when the watercraft was within 10 meters of the watercraft of the manatees, and that is because the manatees viewed the watercraft as a threat. And then this is a figure from the Reichik et al. Study. And if you look at the graph on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see that the y-axis is the change in fluking behavior, and on the x-axis, it's the distance of the boat to the manatee. And you'll see in that first column is less than 10 meters, and you'll see that that's the highest when compared to the two other columns. The second column is 11 to 50 meters, and the third one is greater than 50 meters. So you can see that the most fluking behavior happened when the manatees and the watercraft were within 10 meters of each other. Okay, on the topic of climate change, hurricanes, and how they affect Florida manatee populations, climate change causes an increase in frequency and intensity of hurricanes. This has effects on manatees. I wasn't able to find a statistic on how many manatees die each year by hurricanes, but I believe Florida Fish and Wildlife came out when Hurricane Ian came through Southwest Florida and stated that 15 manatees had died, confirmed. There's probably more because there's always underreporting. And then also, hurricanes disturb seagrass beds, and seagrass, as we've previously discussed, makes up the majority of their diet. They do eat other things, but the majority of it is seagrass. And then hurricanes can result in degree, hypoxia, red tide, sewage, among others. And then climate change causes elevated CO2 levels, sunlight, temperature, and sea level, which can have a negative impact on the growth of aquatic plant life. And this also includes the plants that manatees consume. Now we're going to talk about cold stress, specifically with Florida manatees. Cold stress is, well, let me back up. Manatees like water that is above 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold stress is when manatees are in water that is below 68 degrees Fahrenheit for an extended amount of time. And basically what happens is they'll develop white patches, and they can even develop lesions from the cold stress. This can result in death. It can result in compromised immunity, that kind of thing. So that is what cold stress is. And then I don't know if everybody knows this, but manatees are a migratory species. Manatees will migrate down to Florida, usually for the winter because they like the warm water. And then some manatees will stay in Florida in the summer. Some will migrate up north. But usually they'll stay in the winter, and that time frame is usually about November to like March or April. They'll stay. And so that is because they like the warm water. The 2009 to 2010 winter in Florida had periods with below freezing temperatures, and this was throughout the entire state of Florida. And during that 2009 to 2010 winter, it was estimated, this was according to Florida Fish and Wildlife, that 480 manatees died due to cold stress in Florida during that winter. And so that would be sometime between November and probably March or April. And of the 480 manatees that died, 240 were calves. And then last year in 2023, out of the 555 manatee deaths in Florida, 15 were confirmed to have died from cold stress. And that's also according to Florida Fish and Wildlife. And this is a photo example of cold stress in a manatee. I pulled this image from Florida Fish and Wildlife. I could not find a good picture in the literature of cold stress, but I'm hoping that you can kind of see on the head, there's some white patches. There might even be blisters. I'm not sure. The picture isn't very clear. I'm sure if we saw more of the body and definitely their tail, we would probably see pretty widespread patches and maybe even some blisters. And this is from cold stress. And then some conservation ideas that we can consider in terms of reducing cold stress in manatees is ensuring that there's plenty of warm water habitats for the manatees to winter in. And then number 1 and number 2 kind of, I mean, they all go hand in hand, but specifically 1 and 2. The second one would be habitat conservation of those warm water habitats is really important. And then another one is power plants can provide the warm water that manatees need in the winter. And then conclusion and some next steps. There are many threats that face Florida manatees, way more than the 3 that I discussed today. Some of the others are red tide, entrapment, fishing net entanglement, or ingestion. This includes crab traps as well, habitat loss, etc. More research needs to be done in all of these areas that I talked about today, but specifically when it comes to climate change and watercraft collisions, there's very limited research that has been done on these topics in the last 5 to 7 years. And then 2 things that I think, this is my thoughts and also kind of what the literature says. Many of these threats that manatees are facing are due to human activities, and so I think education is really critical in trying to limit these threats. And then just as a side note, Florida Fish and Wildlife has a really thorough educational program with a lot of outreach and many educational signs by bodies of water with education on safe boating practices. They also have a detailed and educational website. And then the second thing would be encouraging people, specifically boaters, but this can also include just the general Florida population or anybody that's going to be by water, to report a sick, injured, or deceased manatee. This is important so that stranding response can go out, and if they need to rehab the manatee, they can. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something, and let me know if you have any questions. I forgot to show, these are my references.